Good afternoon, buenas tardes. How's everyone doing? Hope everyone is having fun and making connections at CoMotion, an amazing event. Hopefully you're here tomorrow as well. Welcome to what was the 255 panel. We're running a little bit behind. Bridges, not barriers, finding solutions to public engagement challenges. Such an important and timely topic, whether you're in government or the private sector. As mentioned, I'm your moderator, Juan Mendieta, Chief External Affairs Officer for, let's just say, DTPW. It's easier to say. CoMotion's co-presenter, and I'm honored to be here among such innovative thought leaders and disruptors. Joining me on stage are these great-looking and talented panelists, and I know who will say things far more enlightening than I will. Dr. Andrea Iglesias is the CEO and Executive Director of Urban Health Partnerships, an important DTPW partner who recently led engagement efforts through the Community Liaison Framework for our Miami-Dade New Mobility Initiative. UHP focuses on improving health and equity through access, mobility, and improved quality of life, which is so critically important. Javier Betancourt, a friend and longtime collaborator through different roles that we've both held. He is the executive director of the critically important Miami-Dade Citizens Independent Transportation Trust, CITT, a key DTPW partner, leading a team and working with a trust to oversee the People's Transportation Plan, funded by a half-penny sales surtax, and also leading important outreach activities such as the recent Ambassadors Program that I'm sure he's going to talk about. And rounding out our panel, last but not least, is Catherine Santos, the Associate Director of the Transit Alliance Miami, also an important DTPW partner, leading our engagement efforts for the Better Bus Network. And finally, the Better Bus Network is shifting into gear. She's going to be talking a little bit about that. And of course, she and her colleagues advocate for walkable streets, bikeable neighborhoods, and better public transit. So let's give them all a round of applause. All right. So it's easy to see that public engagement is mission critical in all organizations, and not simply to check off the box or because there's a legal requirement, but to really communicate to our constituencies, to gain ownership, buy-in, so that these constituents can then be extensions and advocates for our department. And with that setup, I'd like to have our panelists deliver a 60-second or more opening statement on the importance of public engagement. And let's begin to my right with Dr. Andrea.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you all talking about this topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I wanted to show a couple of slides. As Juan mentioned, I'm Andrea Iglesias. I'm the CEO and Executive Director for Urban Health Partnerships, or UHP. As you can see, when you look at our mission and our initiatives, we focus at the center of everything that we do, first and foremost on health. So I'm coming into this CoMotion space and this panel with a little bit of a different lens, right? Really thinking about health first and the different ways in which we can impact that. One of the things that we do as a focus area is look at healthy streets and public spaces, mobility, equity, and doing that in a way that is community-driven, really informed by the needs and wants of the community, and ensuring that we're shifting power to them and making the decisions that are impacting their communities. For us, that's really important. We know that in order to have healthy lives and quality of life, that we need to address the social and the physical conditions that affect health. So as we talk today and we have this conversation, I'm going to be actually referencing a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. So one is our Community Liaison Framework. This is a power building model that we developed where we hire residents from the communities that we serve, and they help create a bridge between communities and government agencies and other institutions to help promote change in their communities. So I'll be talking about that quite a bit. And I also wanted to reference our community engagement playbook. So this is something that was actually just released. We're really excited about. And it was in partnership with DTPW as part of the Miami-Dade County New Mobility Initiative that Juan mentioned. And this really provides an overview of engagement practices that we learned as a result of that project. So I'll be referencing that quite a bit. So I'm excited to have this conversation today and talk about how we put engagement into action in a really meaningful way beyond checking the boxes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iglesias, and let's go to Ms. Dos Santos.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Juan wonderfully introduced all of us, my name is Cathy Dos Santos. I am the Associate Director at Transit Alliance Miami. We're a local nonprofit that focuses on advocacy for more walkable streets, bikeable neighborhoods, and more accessible public transit. As Juan also mentioned, we were one of the main pushing forces for the Better Bus Network. I say pushing forces because it really was born out of the need from the community and from community engagement. To show a little bit of the keys to successes for the Better Bus Network, or the BBN, as we have, we tend to refer to it as. It was stakeholder approved, it was community informed primarily and at center, and thankfully it was also county backed. And we had the pleasure, and continue to have the pleasure, to work with the Department of Transportation and Public Works, DTPW, to make it happen. So this, above my head, you will see some of the metrics that we use to talk about our success. But I think the main thing I want you to take away from this is the many different ways that we engage the public for this process. Also, as something I forgot to mention previously, the reason why this was such an innovative, not only process, but outcome is because we are the first grassroots-led the redesign of a bus network in the country. We hope we're not the last. And it certainly, I think, show the numbers that are above my head showcase the impact and the many different ways that we managed to engage the public. So we're talking about a 2-year engagement process with many different phases, leading to over 5,000 in-person engagements and 7,000 survey responses across 5 surveys. So that's just one of the few ways that we engage the public. So my hope for today is to tell you a little bit more about our tactics that we found successful, especially within the Miami-Dade context. And also to let you know that, and everybody watching, that the BBN and the engagement around it is not over. We have the incoming launch later this summer with a few pilot routes, and then the full launch later this year. So the engagement does not end there, and we hope it never does, really.
Thank you so much, Mr. Santos, and we look forward to your work. And I failed to mention that we are also live on the World Wide Web, so we say hello to all those following on the live stream. And with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Mr. Betancourt.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be up here on the stage with such brilliant people. I really do respect everything you bring to the table, and in fact, you've inspired us to do a better job in this very topic. So, Javier Betancourt, Executive Director of the Citizens Independent Transportation Trust. That is an agency of Miami-Dade County charged with overseeing your half-penny sales tax for transportation. That half-penny was approved 20 years ago. It's generated $4 billion. It's generating approximately $400 million a year, and it's meant to implement the People's Transportation Plan, the core of which is expansion of rapid transit through such things as a smart plan. You can learn more on the handy handout that you have at your seat. So one of the things we're supposed to be doing as the CITT is to be the representatives of the citizens with respect to how their half-penny investment is being spent, right? We have not done a great job of that as a county or even as a CITT in the past 20 years. So one of my priorities coming in, and with a background, dabbling in marketing and economic development, is to really enhance our community engagement efforts. And I speak truthfully when I say that I was really inspired, particularly by the work of Transit Alliance and watching how they engage with the community and realize we can and we should be doing a lot better, right? If we're going to be the Citizens Independent Transportation Trust, let's communicate with our citizens in 2 ways, right? We want to inform them as to what has happened with their half penny and what continues to be in play. And then also, it's a 2-way communication. We want to hear from the citizens. What would you like done? What are your priorities? What are your concerns? So we have a variety of ways in which we do that, but I'm going to focus on 2 today. One is a podcast that we started about a year ago. Everything is visual, everything is social media now. If you really want to reach people, it's an efficient, easy, and entertaining way to do it. So we started a podcast in partnership with community newspapers, and it's called Mobility Matters, and every 2 weeks we invite either an agency official, an elected official, some member of the community. We've had a bus driver on, and we talk about transportation. And we'll learn about the projects, programs, and services that are being paid for with your tax dollars, and we'll learn a little bit about that person as well. So that's been a huge success. We invite you to follow that. But really the program I'm here to talk about today is the CITT Ambassador Program. So we realize that we really don't know what's happening in the system. We're a small office of 10 people, and we want to know, how are tax dollars being spent, and what is that experience like for the customer? And so we started the CITT Ambassador Program. Basically, if you are a regular rider of transit and want to be part of this program, it's an easy application process. You're pretty much accepted right away. All you have to do is, as you ride transit, you submit observations via an app, and we partnered with an existing app called Velocia to do this. Every time you submit an observation, there's a series of questions. How was your experience? How was the driver? All that good stuff. Every time you submit something, you get rewarded with points. You accumulate enough points, you can turn those in for mobility rewards, a free transit pass, a free ride share, a free scooter pass, or whatnot. So we just launched that program earlier this year. We already have about 80 ambassadors. Our goal is to have at least 300, one person representing every bus route, every metro station, every Metro Mover station, every municipal circulator and on-demand service in the county. All those things are paid for with your half penny, and we hope to have every one of those represented with at least one ambassador. So if you're interested in becoming an ambassador, I know we have some transit riders at the conference today. This will tell you how to do that. And I'm sure we'll speak more to the program as we continue.
Well, thank you so much. And you have a great set of pipes, too, so I see why you're on TV.
That I learned
shows.
from you, sir.
All righty. So with that great setup from our colleagues, we're going to have a very lively discussion. I'm going to throw out some questions before we get to the audience. You can all jump in, and if you don't, I'm going to call on a few of you like we were in kindergarten. So we talked about grassroots efforts with the Transit Alliance. We've talked about the use of social media, the use of earned media. What do you think in today's paradigm are the keys to effective public engagement? Dr. Iglesias?
I see that you called on me first. That's okay. So I think at the end of the day, for me, it's thinking about long-term investment. I think when you think about effective public engagement, it can't be a one-time thing. It's not a one-time event. It's not about one project. It's really about thinking about relationship. How do you build relationship with the community? How do you create a network of champions around this work? How do you keep them informed? How do you have that feedback loop? And invest in that relationship in the long term. And I think I use the word invest, and you're going to hear me say that quite a bit today because it is an investment. It's an investment in time and resources and patience and connection and energy. And communities see that. They see when you care and when you keep showing up. So I think if we want to be effective, we do have to make that long-term commitment rather than just show up, just one time. And then the other thing I'll say is that I think along with that, we have to be strategic. So who are we trying to reach, why, and what capacity, and have that type of plan up front and also be really flexible because you're going to learn things along the way and you're going to need to pivot in order to be really effective. You might have one plan and then you get some community feedback and you realize you've been doing it all wrong. And you have to have the humility to say, okay, let's start over. Let's do something different. Or I'm not reaching a representative group, so we need to go back and rethink the way that we're doing things.
Reporting back is critically important. The one and done is not something we should do. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be checking off a box. This is really ongoing engagement. And I think, Javier, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, so it's ongoing and it's proactive, right?
Yeah.
All too often, particularly in government, we expect people, if we're going to do something, to have to come to a meeting, and we make it as difficult as possible to even do that, or provide kind of old-fashioned input. And we're not out there trying to engage the citizenry where they are. And they don't have a lot of time. And there's a lot of competition for their time and attention. So I think through such things like the Ambassador Program, we're going out into the community. We want your input. We're facilitating it via an app. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. We're providing incentives for them to do it, to reward the behavior. I also think you need to make it entertaining. Again, a lot of people, there's competition for their attention. And visuals, I think, are extraordinarily important in this day and age, right? So that's why we went with a podcast that was a video podcast, just to grab people's attention. And so I think, I would say proactive, visual, and entertaining to the extent we can make it.
Thank you. Mr. Santos?
Yeah, I want to jump on the point of meeting folks where they're at. I think that's something that's very grounding to our work. We always like to think of what the lowest barrier of entry is, thinking about who is going to have the hardest time engaging with this concept, providing feedback and whatnot. So you really want to think about the folks that most likely are not going to be represented unless you go to their front door or you show up at their bus and you ride with them and you interview them or whatever maybe that you're trying to to do in order to get their input, right? So again, just thinking of what the lowest barrier of entry is in order to build interpersonal relationships with the folks you're engaging, and to start to build trust in the system of, engaging in providing feedback, in being a part of honestly what is democracy, right? So that's what we try to focus on.
So reaching the maximum number of people, obviously the pandemic posed tremendous challenges, but there were some gains that emerged from the pandemic. The usage of the QR code came back so that people could quickly click and go right to your website instead of having to type it in or take a picture. But more importantly, the hybrid meeting. We're now able to reach a larger number of people. From a production standpoint, it's a little bit more complicated. There's technology involved. But when you can have a hybrid meeting with, let's say, 100 people in the room, but then another 300 or 400 joining virtually, you're really starting to move the needle and make an impact. So my question is, what are the lessons learned in a post-pandemic world?
Well, you stole our thunder. I think you mentioned the ones I would have talked about. But, the virtual one in particular, I think does expand opportunity for the public to at least be informed about what's happening. It's much easier to watch a public hearing or, be engaged in a meeting virtually than having to drag your butt all the way to downtown with all the challenges that poses. So I think it's opened up access to those workshops. I find that early on we were much more open to receiving comment via those virtual meetings, and now we've kind of closed those off because maybe it's become too cumbersome. But I think that's a mistake. I think we should allow the public to really interact with officials virtually as well. And I would like to see some of that come back. We certainly allow for that at our meetings. So, remote work is another part of the equation. I don't know how it fits into community engagement, but people are no longer commuting to work in the same numbers, and so they may not even be in downtown to attend a meeting. So I think having those virtual opportunities is all the more necessary when so much of your population isn't even coming to downtown where a lot of those government meetings take place.
Absolutely. Anything else to add?
I just wanted to add that I think one thing that the pandemic was helpful with, I guess, if you want to frame it that way, is that it got people talking and thinking about streets and mobility in a different way out of necessity. And I think what we started seeing was that people wanted to see streets as the public spaces that they are and utilize them. We also saw, in some ways, it was like a amped up engagement and assessment that we didn't want, but we ended up getting. And people started telling us what they wanted and what they needed in a very urgent fashion. And I think it caused us to have to respond to that. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned that we want to make sure that we leverage as well, along with some of the things that Javier mentioned.
Speaking of Zoom and hybrid formats, we found a recipe for success. You need to have an in-room moderator, and then you need the online moderator that can control the microphones and the access and such, and really lay out the ground rules at the outset of the meeting. And we found that the hybrid meetings have been extremely successful, and we're getting some of the highest numbers of participants that we've seen in years. The other thing I want to touch on is something that Javier talked about, and that's how do we incentivize public engagement? What are the things that we can do to make it fun? Some forward-thinking organizations out west have included free concerts, have included maybe a performance art piece as part of the public engagement. Certainly we talked about the rewards, but how can we get people there, make it fun, and incentivize participation?
I think it's a wonderful question to approach. Oftentimes, I think the history of public engagement, or perhaps not to get preachy, but it's, oftentimes it's a survey, a poll, something very just back and forth conversation. And there really is the opportunity when you're doing community engagement to do things like demonstrations and pilots and show instead of telling folks. And when you do these things, one, you catch everybody's attention. Which I know that folks have already mentioned. You want to be catchy. You want to be create something attractive, create something beautiful. Even if it's just for a short amount of time to let people know that something is happening, it is worthwhile. It shows them what the possibilities are, and you're gonna bring people that would not have thought to engage with you previously, just because they saw a beautiful bus shelter pop up in their neighborhood, and now they know that there's a plan to add more bus shelters across the county. That is a hypothetical, I'm just saying. But it gives people ideas, right? So when you make something beautiful, people want to engage with it. So there's always that opportunity to show and not tell. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways around that.
Absolutely. And I think the key is also redundancy, not just having one avenue for public engagement, but utilizing social media, public meetings, QR codes, surveys, so that you can give the maximum number of people the maximum opportunity to participate. But let's talk about the younger demographics, millennials and Gen Zers, quickly becoming some of the more engaged people in the citizenry, quickly becoming one of the largest demographics. How do we particularly keep those folks, our Gen Zers and our millennials, which is our target audience for us, for operators, for users, how do we keep them engaged?
Well, use the platforms they're on. So let's start there, right? When we first partnered with community newspapers, they were just doing Facebook Live. And we're like, that's great. Facebook reaches a certain demographic, but not all of them, right? The millennials and the Z Gen aren't on Facebook. They're on other platforms. So you have to, if you're going to reach the entire demographic, like that, which is our aim, we're on all platforms because each one kind of serves a different age group. Make it entertaining, as we said earlier, make it interesting. And really what they want more than anything is to really, they want to be involved, right? It's not enough, they don't want to be talked to, they want to be a part of the process. They want to feel valued. And then don't waste their time, right? Again, they have very short attention spans, right? And so be as efficient as possible, make it easy for them, make it entertaining, and really, truly involve them in a meaningful way, because they will see through the BS very quickly.
Absolutely. Mr. Santos, anything to add to that topic? I think you're in the demo, so we'd like to hear from you.
I think I am, and I would just like to say that I think the fact that there are people my age working in this space speaks to the fact that we want to be engaged. We want to be a part of creating this impact. So definitely don't put away or think of us only as having our young existential crisis, because we certainly are having those, but that's what drives our want and our need to create this impact. So give us, I think, power in the decision making. Make us feel that when we're interacting or we're providing our feedback, that there's an end goal, that there's a solution that comes out of it. Because otherwise, you lose people's attention and you lose their trust. And I think that's true for all age demographics, but especially among young folks.
That's a great point. Empowerment, gaining people's trust. Having people find their why, which I know is very important to that demographic as well. And Dr. Iglesias, anything to add to that?
Yes, I think I want to add something to both of the comments. So we were making a plan recently for some engagement, and someone brought up the idea of leveraging influencers on TikTok, and that's not my space.
We can't talk about TikTok now at the county.
I know. But the idea was really thinking about who's out there having these different conversations in a way that's reaching these generations in a way that maybe none of us are. Like, who are they already listening to? Maybe in a completely different space that has nothing to do with government or transportation, and get them engaged and to understand the value of having these conversations and have them lead it, build their capacity to reach their vast networks. They might have thousands and thousands of views in just one video, and I can tell you if I post a video, I got like 6 views, right? So I'm not going to make that kind of impact. And the other thing I wanted to say, I think it is really important to think about that power in decision making. And I think one of the things that helps is helping to make the connection between now and the future. Because I think a lot of times you think, well, why should I be involved in this? This doesn't really affect me. But when you understand that the plans that are being made now and the policies that are being made now are going to affect you 20, 30, 40 years from now, when you want to buy a home, when you want to take the train, when you want your kids to be able to access those things, then all of a sudden they can connect it to their own lives and why it's important.
Go ahead,
if I could follow up to your earlier comment. So one of the things I didn't mention about the ambassador program is that we mentioned the component where they're providing feedback and input to us, and then we provide that to the department to address those issues that need to be addressed. But they're also getting rewarded for pushing out our messages, which is a really powerful tool when you think about it. If we have 300 ambassadors and we ask them to retweet or repost something that we put on social media, and they get rewarded for that, so they're likely to do it, that 300 could turn into 30,000, with just If each of those send it to 100 people, that's 30,000 people. If only 10% of those people then retweeted and reposted, all of a sudden you're into the 300,000, millions of people, all for free. And not only is it efficient and cheap, it's more effective because people are more likely to read something, to believe it if it comes from someone they know than if it comes from some obscure government agency called the Citizens Independent Transportation Trust, which is already a mouthful. So I think that's going to be a very powerful component of our program. And we're still experimenting with it, so we'll see what the results say. But and then finally, we're using that same group of people to be a focus group, which would be really helpful, I think, for the transit department. What would a group of 300 people representing the broad spectrum of all of our services, all of our routes, what do they think about a certain issue, or how will they respond to a certain message? So it really is, I think, a powerful idea that can grow in all sorts of different directions.
So it's really the immediate feedback, which didn't always happen before. You really have your thumb on the pulse of the community. And speaking of social media, it might not be free for much longer. I don't know if you saw the piece on New York, in the New York Times, that Twitter is considering a fee schedule for outreach for major organizations, which traditionally have been free. There's other ways that they could monetize the platform, but they are looking at a pay schedule potentially. Hopefully that doesn't happen. The pandemic had a lot of traumatic effects. One of the things that arose was skepticism, not only in government but in the private sector. Mr. Santos mentioned that a little while ago. How do we regain the public's trust through engagement?
I think one of the key things to leverage is your stakeholders. Folks who, in our case, we tend to work with individuals who are community leaders who are really ingrained in that they know what and how to reach their community members. So that for us is a starting point for learning what tools, what strategies to utilize. But also what ends up happening is exactly what Javier described, where somebody who is a trusted source shares something with you, and sadly, that's also how misinformation gets spread. But when you use the same technique for the positives, for the truth, then you have this power of a trusted source, information getting disseminated at a faster rate. And you also can utilize that to learn how to best reach the folks that you're trying to reach. So for us, leveraging our stakeholders is a key factor.
I think the lesson for the county overall, and really for any governmental agency, do what you said you were going to do. Right? We made a long list of promises 20 years ago when the voters approved a half penny, and we haven't met them all. Right? So I know we're now engaged in trying to meet those promises through the SMART plan. But people lose trust when you say you're going to do something and you don't do it. So I think the important lesson is do what you said. And then finally, again, just listening to people and showing them that you listened by addressing their concerns or their issues.
I want to piggyback on that because I was at an APTA conference earlier this year, and some of those pundits and critics on social media can become advocates if down the road you report back and utilize one of their ideas and suggestions, and then when you announce the program, you mention them on social media, and you're now creating an ally with someone who was previously a critic of the department, so that's very important. Dr. Iglesias, you had something to add?
I do. When we think about trust, I think the pandemic certainly played a role in leading to a sense of mistrust, but there's been mistrust for a very long time in some communities, and also for a very good reason, honestly. Unmet promises, but also historically intentional or unintentional harm that has been caused. And so I think understanding that history and that context and coming into it with that sense of empathy and understanding and meeting people where they're at with that, I think comes a long way to understanding, what we should not do and being careful not to repeat some of the mistakes of the past or perpetuating some of the same issues that those things have created. And then once you show up, keep showing up, like you were saying, meet those promises, keep showing up, keep having a conversation so it doesn't feel extractive. I think a lot of times we go into a community, we do a survey, we check a box, and it feels like it's like your agenda, not really in service of who they are and what their needs are. So being able to not to have more of a relationship rather than it be just serving kind of your needs to check that box, I think makes a big difference.
And to that, I would also add that for us, for Transit Alliance Miami, the way that we start to approach those difficult conversations, we always try to do it in person. Our in-person engagements they're going to lead to more honest conversations. You also have that empathy, interpersonal connection, and you also end up hearing things that perhaps you were not thinking about in your engagement process. You're going to get new information and you're going to get new perspectives that way. That's why, the analog, obviously we're talking about innovation, so wherever we can include and maximize technology, it's wonderful, but some of the analog approaches are still very effective for building trust.
So one of the things I've done personally to build trust with the community is to embed myself in community organizations. And this is a bit controversial. Not everyone believes we should do this because it could pose conflicts of interest. But it has certainly worked for me, and I think it makes me more aware of what the community needs are. So, I'm chair of Urban Health Partnerships. I am on the board of directors for the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce, an organization I've been a part of for a number of years. And I'm active in several other organizations. And I encourage my team, two of whom are here today, to also become engaged in their community. Because those touch points give you a better sense of what the community needs are. If you're not involved at all, if you're sitting behind a desk and then you go home and you're not engaged at that kind of deep level, you're probably not getting the best sense of what the community wants, what they're experiencing, and how to address those as a public official. So I'm a believer in being involved and just avoiding those conflicts of interest the best you can.
So I'm seeing the points emerging of access, humility. We can't stay up in the ivory tower. I know that in DTPW we've made an effort to go beyond what is required legally to host the maximum number of public meetings so that we can get great participation and, more importantly, get feedback. And even internally, the director has an open door policy, conversations with Cleckley, it has a ring. But just giving every opportunity to employees, whether they have a grievance or not, to come in and spend time with the leadership. And I think the same applies to the community. When they have access to you and your organization, it makes you more authentic and they feel as if they're being heard. And then, of course, like we mentioned earlier, it's not the one-time deal. We should report back to them in the form of annual reports, in the form of social media, so that they're always aware. And I think somebody saw my notes. I wanted to talk about low-tech and analog activities because, I think sometimes in this age we can get carried away with technology and the latest, craze. But the meetings, the touching of the flesh, the low-tech activities still remain critically important, and I think the Transit Alliance proved that right. So what can you add?
I think we definitely feel very strongly about those low-tech. We like to incorporate them with technology and social
Low-tech,
media.
high-touch.
Exactly. Thank you. When you go to one of our meetings, whether it's for BBN or any other project, you're going to see boards. You're going to see people grabbing Post-its and writing on them and putting them and interacting physically with things because that's going to create much more of an experience for them. Again, we're trying to be memorable. We're trying to create trust and create environments where people want to come and share their input with us. So for us, those in-person touch points are key.
Something else I want to talk about. So when we do have public meetings, I've seen this mistake happen all the time. Tell us about the appropriate use of PowerPoint and videos. How should those be played into a public meeting? I've seen people throw up entire 40-minute speeches on slides, 100 slides, or kick it off with a 15-minute video, not just a teaser. So tell me about the appropriate use of some visuals in a public meeting.
I think they help. Honestly, a picture or video really tells a story a lot better than words can. And particularly when you're talking about complex issues, and transportation can get complex, the visual tells the story a lot better. And even better than visuals is having the actual product, right? Like we do outside of this building. So I think it's helpful. However, it can be overwhelming and it can be done very poorly when you throw like 100 words up on a slide. Not this one, this is a good slide. But I've seen some where, the entire speech is basically written on a slide and those are not effective. Use them primarily for visuals and for underscoring a point you're making and just to ease, well, I'll stop there.
Something else I want to talk about in this market is a multilingual approach so that everybody is involved. And if you look at this dais, you can clearly see Hispanics. You may be of Portuguese descent based on your last name. So how critically is it important to communicate in this market, in this region, not only in English, but in Spanish, in Creole, in Portuguese? And what have you done at your organizations to address this issue?
So it's critically important. I mean, if you really want to have breadth of reach and reach those populations that may not normally be engaged, you have to have things in different languages, and also in a way that is understandable. Sometimes we translate things and they don't quite translate. So it's really thinking about also culturally and contextually how that translates for that group of people. It's not just putting it on Google Translate and that's it, right? So I think that's incredibly important. You were talking about hybrid meetings before. One of the things that we did in the Miami-Dade New Mobility Initiative was we had a hybrid meeting, and we actually had interpreters in the meeting, and they had a separate channel where they were for Spanish speakers and a separate channel for Creole speakers, and they could participate along the entire time. We trained those interpreters to also do the same community engagement activities that we were doing. We were doing some whiteboard activities. So everybody was able to participate in whatever language they preferred. Some of them even switched back and forth depending on what they felt was most comfortable. And we got such great feedback from that because they felt like, okay, you wanted to include me, you wanted me to be part of this process, and we made it very accessible for them to do that.
To answer the question directly, having multilingual access for the information you're trying to provide or the engagement it's honestly basics in Miami-Dade. You have to. On top of that, what I would say is that it has to be done intentionally. If you're providing information, whether it's on a meeting or through a survey, those have to be accessible in all the languages. If you're providing them all three, speaking of English, Spanish, and Creole, in one aspect of your engagement, you have to make sure that that is consistent throughout. Otherwise, you're honestly alienating some folks. And when it comes to reaching community members and making sure that the quality of the language translations that you're providing are of good quality, that's when you honestly have to use your stakeholders, see who you can hire from the community directly, who will understand and translate in a way, just as you were saying, that actually translates to the community members. Because Lord knows that if I input something in Google Translate for Creole, I'm not going to know if that's actually helpful, right? And I think it also goes to when you're thinking of branding and things like that, making sure that that translates appropriately, especially if you're going with something short and catchy, that's the best way to go. So just making sure that you're doing it effectively and really with a human touch.
So as you know, in the county, it's been required for a long time that all our informational materials be produced in those three languages. I would argue it's probably time to add a fourth, which is Portuguese. The percentage of the Brazilian population in Miami-Dade County has grown immeasurably over the past decade. They used to go to Broward and Pompano Beach, but we have a large population here now. So we should think about adding Portuguese to that requirement. And beyond languages, and something that we're experiencing as we speak, is making sure that we're able to communicate those with, I don't know if you call it special needs, but visually impaired, auditorily
ADA
impaired, is that the word?
compliance.
Right, and so I'm really frustrated right now because we keep wanting to publish something on our website, but we're being forced to go through this process to make sure that those with visual and auditory impairments can understand
You
it.
can't just put up images.
Right.
Screen readers have to be able to see coded images
Absolutely.
in the language.
So while it's
ADA
frustrating for me,
compliance.
it's really important. So really, it's just thinking even beyond languages at this point.
Absolutely. So giving maximum access, again, is the key. If you're going to truly effectuate public engagement that is successful, you've got to give every avenue for access. We have 5 minutes left in this presentation. We have not heard from our audience. We'd like to turn it over to the audience to see if there were any burning issues, any questions, any suggestions. We're all ears. Anyone? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Very good information. I'm just curious, when you put all this data together from the various methodologies that you're using to gather feedback, how are what's the most effective way you have found then to present that to the decision makers, whether they be individuals or political bodies?
That's a great question because it doesn't do you any good to have all this data if you can't present it in a way that people can consume it and do something with it. For us, there's a couple of things we've done. We realized that the quantitative component, the numbers are really important, but the stories are just as important. Our community liaisons, who are residents themselves, are having conversations with community members all around the county, and we didn't have a great way of capturing that, so we created these field notes, and they kind of write verbatim, like, what are the conversations that they had. We have a community input tracker. And so we do all these things to then distill some themes, to be able to say, okay, we heard about these 5 key things, and we heard this over and over again. And then put some pictures, put some videos, have the community liaisons actually speak to that. Have quotes from them, and then just distill it to those 5 themes. If anybody wants to know all the data behind it, we're happy to share it and how we got there. But telling a story, a real human story, I think is what can be most effective. But you have to be intentional about capturing that along the way.
I would add to that the same tactics that you may use when you're engaging the public in terms of breaking down some very complex ideas into basics, you need to do the same process when you're explaining it to the decision makers, because they are also being, the same way that, every person is being tackled with a million pieces of information every day, they're the same way, right? So that's one way to approach it. Another thing that we have done is to include them from an earlier point in the process. So the county and the commissioners were aware, and obviously the DTPW was aware that we were pursuing the Better Bus Network redesign from essentially the get-go, and inviting them to our own engagement, because then when you present the data, they know exactly how we got to that point. It does not guarantee that there will be attendance, very busy calendars and whatnot, but it is one point of entry, so then when you have the final presentation, report, whatever it may be, they have some additional context to how you got there.
So support everything you all just said, and I would just say, the way I see it, I hear people always say, we should focus on quantitative, or people will say, no, it's qualitative. Well, it's both, right? You need the data, because data is important, but if all you have is data, you won't capture people. You'll lose them. People at the end of the day respond to other people. And so I think reaffirming that data, that quantitative data with the story, and not just telling someone else's story, because that's not as effective, but having that person come to a meeting and tell their own story, puts a face, puts a story to that data, and can be much more effective when done together. So one of the things we're going to do with the ambassador program, another shameless plug, is to recognize the ambassadors by bringing them to our meetings and bringing them to the county commission. So we'll have an ambassador of the month, ambassador of the quarter, ambassador of the year, and we'll give them an opportunity to speak, right? Not only as to their participation in the program, but some of their observations. And that, together with the quantitative data, the survey results, what have you, I think is the most powerful.
So we have 1 minute left. I lost my mic, but luckily I didn't project. Thank you very much. We have 1 minute left, so I wanted to finish with a lightning round, words of wisdom, lessons learned, anything you wanted to impart to our audience and those watching online. Let's begin with you, Dr. Iglesias.
Thank you. So speaking of shameless plugs, we've had the community engagement playbook slide up here. There is a QR code. This was produced out of over a year of engagement with DTPW and our community liaisons. And it shows all of the lessons learned, including how to build your own community liaison framework and how to apply all these types of engagement in a government agency. So you can see it also has a bunch of different tools. So I invite you to take a look at it. It really speaks to basically everything we've talked about today. There's some tools associated with that. And the last thing I'll say is, community voice and prioritizing community voice is critical to create the kind of healthy, vibrant communities that we all want. And so I hope that we can all make that commitment and that investment, because it's the only way that we'll get there. So I hope we can continue to get to work on that.
Great points. Mr. Santos?
I would add that community engagement has to be recurring, and it has to be on the timeline and on the time periods of the community members. There's no 9 to 5 with community engagement. It's whenever you're going to be best able to reach those individuals. So we're very excited to get to our 5 to 9, with starting again with community engagement for the Better Bus Network and the Better Bus Network launch later this year. And I hope you all check out how your routes will be changing.
Can't wait. Mr. Betancourt?
You know, to me, anything in life comes down to the golden rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated. So, you know, as a public servant, we should be thinking about, okay, how would I want to be approached about this? How would I want my ideas, addressed? And think about the community in the same terms. And that means going out to where they are, truly listening to them, not just using them to check off a box. Addressing the issues, right? Making them feel like they are actually being an effective part of a meaningful process. So just if we follow the golden rule in much of life, we'd all be better off.
Well, there you have it. Great panel discussion. Let's give them a round of applause. This is a conversation that is going to be continued. This is ongoing work for all of us. We hope you've enjoyed it. Stick around today and tomorrow, one more day of CoMotion. We look forward to networking and meeting all of you. Thank you very much.